Welcome to Immigration Quicktake. This is Jessica Eyes with the American Immigration Lawyers Association. On Friday, November 15th, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services announced in a policy memorandum that it will allow undocumented immigrants in the United States who are close relatives of U.S. service members and veterans to stay in the United States lawfully while they pursue green cards. Joining us on Skype from Anchorage, Alaska to discuss this announcement is Margaret Stock, immigration attorney and AILA member. Margaret, why is this memorandum so important?
The memorandum is really important because it clarifies the policy with regard to parole in place of military family members. It also clarifies the policy generally with regard to whether somebody who's been paroled can adjust status based upon that parole. So it appears to apply only to military family members and family members of veterans, but it also has ramifications for other people who've been granted parole in place in other contexts. Essentially, it says that they're allowed to adjust status as a policy matter. It's really important to understand who is covered by this memo because a lot of lawyers won't recognize that this memo covers a lot more people than previously were thought to be covered. The memo covers the spouses, parents, and children of people who are currently serving in the military, including people who are serving in the selected reserve of the Ready Reserve, which includes the National Guard. So that's important to emphasize. If you have somebody who's the parent of somebody currently serving in the National Guard, they are eligible for parole in place under this program. The memo also covers veterans who have previously served on active duty or in the selected reserve of the Ready Reserve, which includes the National Guard. A lot of lawyers aren't going to realize this because there's been this myth going around that only active duty people can have their families granted parole in place. Also, many people weren't aware that parents were going to be covered by this, and that's a big deal. Now, the reason parents are a critical thing for you to know about is because traditionally the parents of a U.S. citizen cannot get a waiver of the unlawful presence bar. So what's been happening is a lot of parents who can't prove a past lawful entry would be eligible for an immigrant visa, but they have to travel to a foreign country in order to get that visa. And as soon as they depart the United States, they're subject to a non-waivable 10-year bar. So this memo is critical for the parents because it gives them a form of relief that was not available before. They were basically all stuck in limbo waiting for immigration reform. And now the administration has announced that they will parole these parents in place. They'll allow them to adjust status once their 21-year-old a U.S. citizen son or daughter files papers for them. That's a critical new development. It's going to affect a lot of people in a very positive way.
What led up to this moment? Why has it happened now?
Well, I think you'll have to ask the agency exactly why it happened now, but there's been a policy of allowing family members of military personnel to be paroled in place so that they can adjust their status. It hasn't been ever announced before, though, in a national policy, so it was one of these things where sophisticated attorneys knew about it. This has been going on since 2008. 2008 was when they first publicized a case nationally. Matt Colkin, who was an AILA member, had a case up in Buffalo in 2008 that hit the news, and he was able to get his client granted parole in place and then adjust her status. And that was the first case people had heard about because it was the first one that was in the news. But this practice has been going on since 2008. It's just that there had never been an official national policy memo released before. And the policy memo, of course, is important because it clarifies exactly who the policy applies to, how people should apply for parole in place, and it also clarifies that they're allowed to adjust their status, which is something that had been in dispute in a number of field offices around the country.
What will this mean for military families?
It's great news for military families. I think everyone knows that several years ago, John Morton had issued a prosecutorial discretion memo that addressed the issue of whether military families should be granted prosecutorial discretion. And John Morton had said that they should be granted prosecutorial discretion if they were the immediate relatives of a U.S. citizen who was serving in the military. But there'd never been a policy that said what could happen to them with regard to immigration benefits. So many families were left in limbo. They were allowed to have prosecutorial discretion if somebody was trying to deport them, but at the same time, they weren't eligible to apply for adjustment of status if they couldn't prove that they had had a lawful entry to the United States in the past. So this memo is critical because it says now that as a matter of national policy, they can be granted parole in place And if they are the immediate relatives of a United States citizen and they are otherwise admissible, they can adjust their status inside the United States. I want to give you one last example before we close about why they did this. We had a number of cases where parents lost their children in military service. So that the son or daughter was killed in combat, and the parents were entitled to statutory benefits. Congress had said that they would continue to be considered the immediate relatives of a United States citizen if they had lost their son or daughter in combat. However, if the parents could not prove a lawful entry to the United States in the past, they were unable to take advantage of these statutory benefits. This memo makes it clear that those parents will be able to take advantage of the benefits that Congress gave them, and they will be able to adjust their status and won't be banned from the United States for 10 years.
Thank you, Margaret, for joining us to discuss this on Skype all the way from Alaska. For the rest of you, please stay tuned for more updates through the American Immigration Lawyers Association.